car, smelly car. Jerry's got a smelly car, smelly car, smelly car. Oh, that's the wrong show, and that is the wrong song, of course, but just a parody. I had to do that. Oh, the smelly car, the smelly car. The smelly car came from, the idea of the smelly car came from Peter Melman's attorney friend, who was always pitching random Seinfeld ideas to him, but none of them were any good. Melman was just not interested in any of them. Then one day, his friend was telling him some story about how a valet parking agent went into his car, and he had such bad BO that he just left this stench on the car, and he just couldn't get it to go away. And Melman's like, well, that's a story right there. So it's what led to, the main story of this episode, why it was called The Smelly Car. Jerry and Elaine went to a restaurant, and Jerry had parked his car, had a valet agent park his car. And of course, they were leaving. Jerry was supposed to drop her off at this guy Carl's house that she just started seeing, and she's supposed to spend the night with him. They get into the car, though, and they start driving, and they smell this really nasty smell, and they said it smells like BO. They even try to air out the windows and everything. They could not get the smell away. It was just some nasty stench that just stuck onto them, and it would not go away. Elaine goes to Carl's house. They seem to be getting along. They start to, make out a little bit, and then he takes a couple sniffs at Elaine's hair, and all of a sudden was like, ugh, he had a little bit of a disgusted look on his face. Meanwhile, Kramer and George were at the movie rental place, getting ready to return a movie. George actually had rented Rochelle, even though earlier in the season, in the movie episode, they all saw it and they thought it was pretty bland and wasn't a big fan of it. While he's there, though, he spots two ladies holding hands with each other. And he's thinking ooh, lesbian spotting and whatnot. So he was just started thinking lesbian jokes in his head and went up for the fun of it. Until the couple turns around, and it ends up being Susan Ross, his most recent girlfriend. Well, one of his most recent girlfriends. He did have Betsy back in the implant episode. So he turns around hoping that Susan wouldn't recognize him. But she does recognize him. And Susan introduces her girlfriend Mona to George. And then Mona says, I'll let you two catch up. So she goes off on her own. And then Susan's like, are you okay? And he's just like, yeah, I just haven't seen you for a while. And Susan's like, and I'm sure you weren't expecting me to be holding hands with a woman. Basically like, yeah, I like women now. Well, how long has this been on for? Since we broke up. So George starts wondering, and again, I don't want to, sound like, I'm taking sides and getting controversial here or anything. I'm definitely not trying to at all. But of course, back then, same-sex relationships was not really the hottest topic, as it is right now. A hot topic as it is right now. But George starts wondering if it was him that drove Susan to women instead of, men. Meanwhile, Kramer was in the background. He's showing Mona his golf swing, and she seems flattered by it. George, though, was trying to return Rochelle, and the video guy told him it would be $3.48, or $3.49. He's like, $3.49? He says, I thought it was $1.49. And he says, oh, you didn't rewind it, so there's a $2 fee for that. Which Kramer convinces him not to, not to pay for it. So he says, fine, we'll go back and I'll rewind it and return it tomorrow. He had another day on it. So the next day, back at the apartment, Jerry and Elaine are together, and Elaine's saying how Carl told her that he had to get up early the next day, which then tells Jerry Jerry tells her, try to explain to her, that's a turn off, basically saying he's not turned off, until they realize, well, first, she realizes that it was probably from the BO. She smelled from the BO. Jerry went down to, of course, check out the car. The car still had the smell, even if he tried to air it out. And then Kramer came in though and told Jerry that he stunk. He just showered, but he realized since he showered, he went down to see the car. So he realized that the BO is still attached. And then he said he had taken it to go get checked to see how much it would cost to get it clean, get the smell out. $250, which he refused to pay for, as he said that restaurant should be at least paying for half of it because it was their parking agent who gave them the BO. George, meanwhile, though, is telling them about, how Susan is now into women, and he's wondering if he drove her towards that direction. Now, there was an earlier episode where George said he has driven women that route before, but this is the first time we've actually seen it on camera with an actual, recurring character, go that route. So George was going to go for a ride anyways. He's to return Rochelle, and he also wanted to meet up with Susan and talk to her to see if he drove her to what she's doing. So first they go back to the restaurant, and the guy was refusing to give them any money until they made him sit in the car. He smelled it. He begged to get out. He said he'll give him $50 for it. And then Jerry goes, no, I want at least half. So he agrees to pay $125 to help put towards the cleaning. Elaine went to go get her hair washed. Went to go see Carl. Still smelled. And basically the hairdresser person that told her that, her last resort is tomato sauce, which she went with at the end of the episode. Don't remember if it helped her or not, but I'm sure it probably did, because of course in the next episode after that, they don't have the smell anymore. Jerry, though, goes and has the car cleaned and everything, pays $250. Half of it was given to them from the restaurant, and after cleaning it, it still smelled. He could not get rid of it. But then, of course, George goes to meet Susan at the video place. But George had gone with them to get the guy from the restaurant to pay for at least half of the cleaning. George then had Rochelle in the car, and then somebody had stolen it while they were inside the restaurant. So when George goes back to return it, he also met with Susan, trying to see if he was the one who drove her to do what she's doing. But of course she's denying it. But then again, it's like, again, I guess as Heidi Sweetberg and Jason Alexander both said, it's like, they made George out to be some type of like a loser to be with. So it's like, you can either, go that route, or you could date George. Like, George is like the last resort that it feels like, which, is sad, but it's very fitting towards a character. Since George lost Rochelle, though, he had to pay $98, which he didn't have enough money for, so Susan gave him $35 at the bar, and he said he'll pay him back, and then Susan's like, yeah, I'm sure you will, which is revealed also later in the episode when George runs into another one of his old girlfriends, which we'll talk about her in a second, and he owes her money also. But meanwhile, speaking of girlfriends, Mona, Susan's girlfriend, meets up with Kramer, and they embrace. And then, of course, Jerry, is back at the apartment, then freaking out because, he still can't get the smell out. And this is before Elaine went to get sauced up with the tomato sauce, and Carl still said she smelled. And in the midst of all that, though, George was with them. But in the midst of all that, they hear some banging on the door, on Kramer's door, and a woman yelling for Kramer. They open it up, and it's Susan. She finds out that Mona fell in love with Kramer. And sure enough, they say Susan always disliked Kramer. And again, remember, Heidi Sweetberg thought at first that she was going to be Kramer's girlfriend. But it wasn't until later in the season she realized, oh, I think I'm actually George's girlfriend instead. Well, definitely so, because look what all happened. As she said, first he vomits on me, then he burns down my father's cabin, and now he's taking Mona away from me. She's in love with him. And Mona, up until Kramer, had never had any sort of feelings like that for a man. She's always been lesbian. And then George just goes, how about that? I drove them the one way, Kramer pulls her back. So George goes to follow Susan, who he admitted that when he saw Susan, and realized Susan, which way Susan swung, he found her much more attractive and whatnot. Once she goes away, Kramer comes out and says that they hit it off, and how she was a golf teacher, and that's how they really got talking and whatnot. But then Jerry asked him again, Kramer, you realize she has never ever been with a man before? He goes, I'm just Kramer, and he has this type of magic that made someone who's a woman who's into women into men. So George, of course, then goes to, first, Jerry, since Jerry can't get rid of the smell, he wants to sell the car, which George said he would buy it from, but Jerry talks him out of it. He tries to go sell the car. The car salesman, of course, smelled the BO. He said he can't sell it. So Jerry is just desperate. Before the end of the episode, though, George and Susan, met up, in the coffee shop to talk some things out. And George even admitted that he was attracted to Susan a little bit more when he saw her holding hands with a woman, which would have shown that's the third time them possibly getting back together, because George missed her in the pick, tried to get back with her, but then realized he made a mistake, did the pick to escape, and now he's about to lose out again because while they were there, he sees his old girlfriend Allison, who was the one in the outing that basically didn't want George to break up with her. And when George tried to use the article that was posted about him and Jerry being in love with each other to try to get her to go away, it still didn't work and whatnot. So I don't know what happened that finally led them to break up, but George tried to make sure Allison didn't recognize, but then she did, and like Susan earlier doubting that George would pay her back, Allison says that George owes her money. George then introduces them to each other, and Allison compliments Susan's vest, and when Susan was very flattered by the compliment, and then implied that those two started becoming a thing, which of course we knew because they were shown being together in the finale episode of this season. So then of course George is sitting there, he's like, I can't catch a break. Meanwhile, again, Elaine went to go get her hair cleaned in tomato sauce. Jerry, of course, was driving the smelly car around, and then he sees a homeless person on the street. He basically gets out of the car, swings the keys, tosses them in the car, and runs away. And the guy gets in the car, goes to start it, but then realizes the smell is but it was out of Jerry's hands. He went on to get a new car because the car just would not go with the smell. And yep, that's the Smelly Car episode. Interesting one for sure. Bad BO. George may have driven Susan to go the opposite way. Not there's anything wrong with that, of course. So yeah, interesting Peter Millman episode for sure. Very well done, Peter. But yeah, that's the Smelly Car. We'll move on now to the final two reviews of Season 4, which is Part 1 and Part 2 of the pilot episode, in which Jerry and George have a casting session for their pilot, the Jerry Show. Well, it was called Jerry. But also there was some problems, especially because Russell Dalrymple was much more distracted about other things besides his job. And what is that? Well, let's just say Elaine helped them save the pilot, and then Elaine unfortunately ruined the pilot. How's that the case? We'll talk about it next when we do Parts 1 and Parts 2, of course in separate videos, of the Season 4 finale, the pilot. So guys, what were your thoughts though on the Smelly Car episode? Leave your thoughts down in the comment section below. And be sure as always to slap a like on the video, subscribe for more content to my channel, and follow me on Twitter as well at DemandAirBoy93. Until then guys, I'm checking out. I'll see you all later. have a great night, and be safe and be sound. And also, don't get any smelly BO in your car. Peace out, everybody.